Shana Tova. I want to tell you a story about Sherry. Sherry was in Jerusalem this summer when she lost her kippah. It was large, white, and lacy. It had a rainbow ribbon with a Magen David, a Jewish star woven through it. She had had it for about 6 years. She would save it to wear only on Shabbat when she was in Jerusalem. And she felt fortunate to have worn it 3 Shabbatot this year. But this summer was the last time that she would ever wear that kippah. You see, Sherry was with a group, and they were walking down Agron Street, through the Mamila Mall, up the stairs and through Jaffa Gate to enter the Old City. Aryeh, the guide, stopped here and there to explain what they were seeing, its historical significance. As they walked through the ancient streets of the Old City, they saw scores of couples and families enjoying a beautiful Shabbat afternoon, walking around, visiting friends, going to the kotel. It wasn't far from the Cardo, the original main street of the city where it happened. As the group walked, another group of young boys, about 9 or 10 years old, came up to them, pointed to her kippah, and said, "Reformi?" She smiled back and said in Hebrew, "She just wears a kippah," and continued to walk with her friends. But then suddenly she was surrounded by about a dozen boys, 9 years old, closing in on her. She spoke to them with a firm voice, telling them to back off, to leave her alone. But they did not. One of her colleagues ran to get her guide, yet before he could arrive, a young boy punched Sherry in the back of the head, and another ripped the kippah off. The male adults with the boys did nothing to stop this harassment that had now turned to violence. And the women standing on the balcony overlooking this said nothing. Sherry and her friends continued walking with their guide, trying to ignore what was going on. At no time did any of the adults try to intervene. Finally, a soldier passed by, saw what happened, what was going on, and he spoke to the boys, all in Hebrew. They pulled back for a bit, but when the soldier left, they just kept taunting her. Anyone who knows Sherry knows that she does not wear a kippah to make a political statement. She wears a kippah, like I do, to teach, to daven, to be in a holy place. And Jerusalem is on top of that list of holy places. After this experience, Sherry indicated to the group that she was done wearing a kippah here in Jerusalem. If this was going to be the reaction, she did not want to cause herself or anybody any trouble. But the story continued. As she was waiting to leave for the evening activity, the rabbi who was with the group, who had been told of the incident, looked at her and said, "Where's your kippah?" She said she was done wearing it for the reasons that I already shared. He replied, "If you stop wearing it, you let the bullies win." He called the incident disgusting, unacceptable on every level. She protested. And then this Orthodox rabbi, whom she met just a few days ago, took off his own large black kippah and said, "Then I will give you my kippah to wear." It was a magnificent and loving gesture that Sherry will never forget. Several days later, Sherry went to the shuk. The shuk, if you've ever been there on Thursday or Friday before Shabbat, know the scene. It has so much hustle and bustle. And she decided to continue to wear the kippah. As she was about to turn the story to go onto Agrippa Street and then into the shuk, she stopped at a small shop that carries beautiful linen dresses. She was looking at one particular rack, and a woman working in the store, dressed very modestly with her hair covered, came up to Sherry and said in Hebrew, "Please be careful, Shamati, I heard that they ripped off a kippah from a woman in the old city." I know. That was me. Sherry? You are Sherry? Sherry smiled and enjoyed the power of social media at its finest. A concerned fellow Jew had seen her previous blog post outlining the initial incident and realized, isn't this exactly what the power of a kippah is? A kippah forges the connection between us at the best of moments. And shouldn't it make us wonder, how many times do others dictate to us when we should or shouldn't wear a kippah? And this is actually beyond a kippah. This is a question of how we see ourselves. Do we let others define us, or do we define ourselves? It isn't always easy. I am not sure what I would have done in Sherry's shoes had my kippah been torn off. So the question is, do we show our identity at all? Do we mark ourselves in public? In thinking about this, I remembered that I was once asked a question in an online rabbinic platform that I was posed questions to, and then I was one of the rabbinic responders. Is it better if one is going to gamble or do any shady ethical activity to remove all signs of Jewishness, like a Magen David or a kippah? Or is that worse? Now, as your rabbi, let me make it clear that I don't think that Sherry was doing anything wrong ethically when she was wearing a kippah in Jerusalem. But her incident, and this makes us ask, are there times that we should remove our identity markers? So I answered this questioner in the following way. Let me start by saying, if there is something that you feel you shouldn't be doing, then it doesn't matter whether you are wearing a kippah or not. You probably shouldn't be wearing it. I say this, I think about this issue actually of gambling because we know there's a difference between a nickel slot and betting on a dog fight. So it's not gambling per se, but rather these secondary implications. Is a shady activity one that is legal or not? How do you behave when you're doing that? What language do you use? How do you treat others? In my opinion, all of these questions and so many more are the ones that play a role in whether you should wear a kippah. So in answering the question, I decided to actually focus on the role of a kippah. A kippah is worn for many reasons. For some, it is to remind us of God's presence, an act of piety, or to identify ourselves as a Jew who believes in Jewish values and traditions. So I shared with the questioner, with that in mind, you should remove your kippah or other signs of Jewish identity if you are doing things that are shady. But this only addresses the second role of the kippah. Because in the first role, the kippah will not remove God's presence or make you invisible. This is between you and God, whether you have that on or not. But the second issue, which relates to your fellow human beings, the kippah should be removed because it can fall into two religious categories. The first is marit ayin, giving the appearance that something is permitted Jewishly, even if it is not. When you wear a kippah, people look at you as a Jew who knows what they are doing. And if you are doing it and you have a kippah on, then whatever act it is must be kosher. And I'm speaking beyond food, of course. You must remember that you have a responsibility not to mislead people. The second category, when we have our kippah on, if we do something bad, is Chilul Hashem, literally the desecration of God's name, implying that through our activities, we create a bad reputation for the Jewish community. Because somebody could look and say, see those Jews? Look how they behave. This is the reason that Jews cringe when they see Jews in the news doing something bad. Finally, the important question shows the power of the kippah and its third role. Simply wearing it creates an entire thought process before one takes any action. I think that is also an important reason to, in fact, put on a kippah. So why do I wear mine? First, I am connected to the Jewish people. Second, the wearing of a kippah is a marker of identity of which I am extraordinarily proud. Third, there is something above me. I call it God. That doesn't necessarily mean that I ascribe to the position that God looks like an old man in the sky, but it does mean that God is a kind of force. God in this world is someone with whom I am in partnership, and I try to live my life committed to the sanctity of all life, and particularly our Jewish traditions. Wearing a kippah elevates my body and my soul to spiritual heights that I can feel when I put it on. Rabbi Josh Hammerman, in his recent book, Menschmarks, reflects on the yarmulke bin. You know what he means, the one in one of our cupboards, where we can pull the kippot out at our Passover Seder or other Jewish moments. The kippot might be wine-stained or have crumbs of matzah from yesteryear, but it has a fascinating reflection. He writes, on the surface, it seems to pale when compared with other objects. Unlike the talit, it has no foundation in the Torah. Unlike the siddur, it can be tossed into the garbage. But as Jews, we are instantly identified when wearing one, exposed not only as Jews, but as pious Jews. Some say the name yarmulke stems from the Aramaic expression yira malka, fear of the king, based on the Talmudic anecdote that Rav Huna never walked 4 cubits without his head uncovered, because the divine presence is always over our head. And this is more than just humility. It's about identity. It used to be that if you were wearing a kippah, you were automatically identified as one kind of Jew. Kippah choices were limited to the tightly stitched head huggers of traditional Zionists, or the black velvet of the fervently Orthodox, and the less expensive blends found in typical synagogue bins. But now, as with the rest of contemporary Judaism, one size no longer fits all. I think, for example, about Jared's bar mitzvah. We had some for women, some for men. I think about Miles Levine's bar mitzvah, who had Mets colors. I think about our Mets and Nets in Hebrew and in English. I think about our kippah from Women's League Shabbat, or a kippah from a wedding, or a Bukharian kippah. Each kippah has its own moment, has its own memory. I feel such pride when I see these kippot. For looking at them, for me, is like looking at my living photo album. Each kippah reflects the nexus between identity, memory, and a sense of pride in who I am as a parent, who I am as a rabbi, who I am as a sports fan, even though the Mets just can't seem to win, who I am as a friend when I can put on a kippah from a bar, bat mitzvah, or a wedding. Sadly, the choice of when to wear our kippot today or not to wear it also might come with a place of fear. We know that in Europe, Jews are taught not to wear kippot in public. And I will be honest, even though I often wear my kippah all over, there have been times here in New York over the past few years that it has even given me pause. And yet I think about where we are living today, that we can and do wear kippot to a Mets game and be fully Jewish and fully American, that we have kosher restaurants that we can walk into and enjoy is something that I do not take for granted. But considering these issues of memory and identity and a sense of belonging, that is what our holidays are about. This season, which begins now, enables us to connect with these ideas. Let us use these days to dig deep into our sense of belonging and believing. Let us struggle with how we are perceived by others. Let us remember how we behave and how we recall the behavior of others. And of course, we don't do this alone. We do this vis-a-vis our relationship with God. God, too, has many attributes that we recall on these holidays. We recall our God of judgment. We think of God as a shepherd. We hope that God is a God of mercy. As we look deep into the recesses of our soul, trying to ascertain who we are and who we can grow into in this new year ahead, let us embrace this holiday season. Let us use the high holidays as they give us a chance to do this. We can think about the various kippot that we wear as we aspire to live our ideals as reflected in these kippot. How can I celebrate more? By looking at the kippot from all of the weddings and b'nai mitzvah of those that I have loved. How can I show more pride for my Judaism and for those identities that get woven into the fabric of my kippot? How can I recall the relationships that I have had that have been lost as I look at those kippot? Let us each reach into our proverbial yarmulke bin, pull out the ones that we haven't seen recently, but we know still gives us meaning, so that in 10 days, when we come together, confront our own mortality on Yizkor, we can appreciate even more the journeys that we have been on during these years. For as Rabbi Hammerman wrote, the kippah is a touchstone to our holiest moments, reminding us perpetually, under me lived a Jew. Let us live that identity this year, proudly, securely, and passionately. Shana Tova.